Well, welcome everyone. This is our February monthly tea tasting, and we do these last Thursday of every month. And the focus is really on providing folks with more awareness, knowledge of tea and the cultures that tea comes from. Tonight, my presentation is focused on Japanese tea, and the title is In Pursuit of Excellence. I, as one of the owners, my wife Heather right here, we started the business in 2012 and are now in our 8th year. Picture you see right here is just of one of the large plantations in the Shizuoka prefecture. So a quick geography lesson. This is a map of Japan. You'll notice that the North Island, Hokkaido, is kind of cut off. You just see a little piece of it at the top. But I did not go to Hokkaido. I was in Honshu, the main island, which is here, and also in Kyushu, which is the southernmost island in Japan. Kyushu, more subtropical. Honshu has a good deal of heat in this part, but as you go farther up north, it gets more and more temperate. The two places that, as I said, I visited, you'll see Shizuoka right here. And this is the largest tea growing area in Japan, is in and around the Shizuoka prefecture. There's also some very famous tea that is grown around Kyoto. That's the Uji area. That's a lot of where like the emperor's tea originated, the Gyokuro. So it's a very famous tea growing area. Some of the best varietals. And then also lots of tea growing down in Kyushu. And I was in Kumamoto. Kumamoto, the state of Montana has a sister state relationship with Kumamoto. And you'll see some pictures of the woman that works for the state of Montana. She is Japanese, but she was my host. Alrighty, now into a little bit of history. Japan did not start drinking tea until the 9th century. Obviously, it had been in China for a long, long time, but it was Buddhist monks that were first turned on to it by going to China and studying there. And eventually, they brought some tea back. Now, they didn't start growing it yet, but they started bringing tea from China. And so it gradually worked its way into Japanese culture. Due to the historical influences from Buddhism, the shoguns, and from the samurais, tea has always been viewed as being good for you, associated with well-being and something that was healthy. All right, so tea cultivation begins in the 12th century, starts on the southern island, and a Buddhist monk named Isai was the one who is attributed to importing seeds. And as they start to grow it, obviously it gets moved north up onto the island of Honshu. And so again, we're talking about, this is really the full-on era of shoguns and the samurais. The samurais became quite attached to tea because of what it did in terms of both purification and also giving them strength. So the samurais were a big proponent of tea. There's a transition during this period, initially because of the affinity that the shoguns have for it. Tea is quite ostentatious. And of course, all the technology, all the equipment, apparatus comes from China. So initially, tea is very much of a ceremonial thing, and it's quite like a big party almost in the palaces. Starting in the 15th century, that changes. And I guess you would say that Japan adopts a very much of a different approach to tea. Now, there is a gentleman by the name of Takeno-ju, who is essentially Senriku's teacher, and he develops the concept called wabi. And this is really the reflection of the new way of drinking tea. Wabi means frozen withered beauty, and it's attributed attributes beauty and worth to items that are imperfect, incomplete, or irregular. So very much taking, I guess, more of an austere, simplistic approach. And this is also when the tea ceremony, what we now know as the Japanese tea ceremony, it grows out of this, the wabi philosophy. Now, Senriku, he's responsible for Chado, what they say, the way of tea, based on the 4 principles: harmony, respect, purity, and serenity. The first 3, harmony, respect, and purity, those 3 really embody the last, which is the serenity, that feeling that you get after you've drunk tea. 7 rules that Senriku came up with: make a delicious bowl of tea, set down some charcoal to heat the water, arrange some flowers as they are found in the fields. In summer, evoke coolness. In winter, heat. Anticipate the weather in each thing. Prepare yourself for rain, and show every possible consideration for your guests. I can tell you that based on my travels to Japan, this last one is paramount, because the Japanese are so polite, so courteous. The bowing, all of that is really embodied in that statement right there. So it shows you the longevity, one, of their culture, but also how connected they have been to tea. And you can really see that, as I said, when you go there, even in the present day. Oh, I just wanted to show you, so this guy right here, he was my host. He's a Japanese old boy for Superman RFC. And so we stayed, Judd and I stayed with him, but we're here at the park in downtown Tokyo. So this is where all the museums and the zoo is. And this is one of the temples that we went to, but he's just doing a little prayer ceremony in front of one of the Buddhist temples. Okay, so the art of tea, bridging the traditional and the contemporary. This is what you might consider just a classic Japanese tea garden. And this is actually taken, the picture was taken at the Tea Museum in Shizuko. But again, gets back to that concept that I was talking about. Furyu, wind flow philosophy during the beginning of the Edo era, tea embodies a taste for simplicity and natural beauty. And so really that's the foundation for the tea drinking culture in Japan today. All right, so we're gonna get into some matcha. Zach is gonna be starting to prepare matcha, so we'll be bringing some of that around. Matcha is the most unique green tea in the world. And some people would call it a super tea. It's definitely like no other tea though, in terms of how it's made and also how it's consumed. Okay, here's a picture. Just took this in a little tea shop that was and just walked in, and of course, people were all over the place, just obviously investigating. But for us, we were there for the ice cream, the green tea ice cream. All right, characteristics of matcha: super refined, most processing of any tea. And of course, if you are familiar with it, you know that it has that fluorescent green, very vibrant color to it. Unique flavor profile: it's a combination of both the bitter and the sweet. And you would also say umami. The umami is that Japanese word for yummy, deliciousness. It's basically the fifth taste, is what they refer to it as, is the umami. Obviously, remarkable health properties. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But again, what makes the matcha different is that it is shade grown. What that means is about 4 to 6 weeks before the harvest, they will put rice or straw mats over the tea bushes. And basically what that does is it triggers the plant to produce lots of chlorophyll. And so that's what gives matcha that really bright green color. Now, of course, it's also doing other things, but that is where the Japanese perfected this. It started in China, believe it or not, the Chinese would pulverize the leaf with stone. They ground it with stones. But it wasn't until the Japanese really started working at it, and basically they discovered that by covering it, it really brought out a lot more flavor and a lot more vibrancy from the leaf. So that's the shade grown, what they call the Yoshita. World's only suspension tea. Matcha is not soluble. You have to actually whisk it. And so you drink it out of a bowl, but it will settle. It settles to the bottom. So you want to consume it, relatively quickly. Calming stimulant, gives you a state of euphoria, but still, really relaxed and mellow. A sense of mental alertness and deep relaxation, similar to meditation. So, when you're drinking matcha, it's a form of meditation. Okay, so with matcha, it's all about the preparation and the presentation. At our next tea talk, we will have a Japanese tea master. She's a visiting professor at U of M, and she's going to come in and do an abbreviated tea ceremony next month as part of the Women in Tea talk. So you'll get to see this, more firsthand then. But this is a picture I took from a matcha that I got in Kumamoto, just at a local tea house. And of course, it's usually served, this is the black edamame bean, and then with a little bit of sweets, a little candy or a little bit of sweets. All right, health benefits, lots of it. Matcha is packed with antioxidants, including the powerful EGCG compound. So it's an antioxidant, a catechin, and this is really what helps boost your metabolism. Also has anti-cancer, antiviral, and antiseptic properties. So really, really good for your body. Burns calories. It's a detoxifier. Obviously, we mentioned what it does for your mind. Rich in fiber, chlorophyll, and vitamins. Enhances mood and aids in concentrations, and helps prevent disease, lowers your cholesterol and blood sugar. I think, in terms of, they say that when you drink 1 6-ounce bowl of matcha, that's equivalent to drinking 10 cups of tea. Now, it does also have more caffeine in it, but it has much more antioxidants, than a normal cup of tea. So that's, again, people drink it for the health reasons, but of course they also really enjoy the taste and the feeling they get from it. So this is why matcha has really taken off in the US in the last 10, 15 years. Okay, so now we're going to transition to some of the farms that I visited. The first farm we went to, it's called Happy Mukujiman, and this is basically a smaller operation. And what I found out, it took me a little while to figure it out, but these folks are basically suppliers for Sujimoto tea, who we work directly with. So they wanted me to see an operation. That, again, is attached to Sujimoto, again, almost like a contractor or a subcontractor, if you will. And so they have a close relationship, but they're separate companies, okay? Now, this gentleman right here, that's Masaaki Sujimoto. He's the son of the current president. You'll see a picture of the president. And then this is Masayuki, and he was our interpreter, but he works for Happy Mukujima. Okay, so he was an employee, spoke really good English because he's traveled around the world, worked for other companies, and now is working for Happy Mukujiman. Okay, so this machine right here is a tea cutter. In Japan, virtually all of the tea is cut with machines. There is some that's hand-picked, but not very much. So most of it is coming now from machines like this. Now you're going to see a picture of a very antiquated machine at the end of the slideshow that the farm that I visited in Kumamoto has. So very, very, or much more primitive. Okay, so this factory started in 2016. It has a capacity of 1.5 tons of matcha per day. They do about 80 to 90 metric tons per year. They do 3 harvests in the spring, in the summer, and the fall. So 3 harvest seasons, 2 shifts, 24 hours a day during harvest. But here's the catch. There's only 2 people working in the factory. So this shows you how automated and how technological the matcha production has become. Matcha production is very intensive. There's separate processing facilities, and I'll get into a little more detail about this, but there's definitely a lot of money, capital investment that goes in to starting a matcha factory. Now, I just got some information from our friend Noli, who works here in the US for Sujimoto. Basically, this is what he described it for me. This company, they do what they call the Aracha Tencha, or crude tencha. So what they're doing when they're processing the leaf is they're steaming it, they're drying it, they're baking it, and they're de-stemming it. So they'll take that batch then, once they've finished that, and then they'll bring that to the Sujimoto factory, which you'll see pictures of here. The most important step, I guess, from this factory is the baking of the leaf. It takes about a half hour to an hour, and it just goes in on a conveyor belt, stays in there, and then comes out. But that baking is very important in terms of both preserving the leaf, preserving the antioxidants in the leaf, and also drawing more flavor out from it. They don't roast matcha, although we do have the hojicha. So again, I'm still a little unclear about what that means. But in general, Noli says that if you were to roast matcha, it's too high a temperature. Definitely, with all these facilities that are doing matcha, super high commitment to cleanliness. You definitely are washing your hands. At the Sujimoto facility, they actually had an alcohol sensor that could detect, if you had germs or dirt or impurities on your hands. And then you go into these air dryers that blow all the dust and all the stuff off of you before you go into the factory itself. So all that technology has got to cost a fair amount too. This is a picture of Kazuta. So he is essentially running Happy Mukojium, and his dad has passed on recently, so his mom's still around. So he's taken over this company, and he's got to be in his maybe 30s or something. But what was cool about what they had done is his dad went organic in the early 80s, in 1982. So they've been able to maintain that, and I think that's one of the reasons why they work so closely with Sujimoto. So Sujimoto Tea Company, this is the company that we work with. They were established in the 1940s, and it's a family-run business in the sense that 3 generations. It's really amazing. And of course, one of their sons is in the US working for their North American office. And then Masaaki is the director and will likely take over for his dad in terms of the hierarchy.
I'll interject here that I met Kyohei, who's the son that lives in the United States. I met him on a bus.
That's where, yeah.
In California, he and I were on a bus. We've been at a conference, but he was kind of separately and heading in different directions. I was sitting next to him. I was like, oh, hey, who are you? And it turned out we've been to the same conference. And that's how I started working with him. I'll also say that, I don't know if Jake knows this, he might bring it up, but either their grandfather or his father was awarded some kind of cultural distinguished award from the Japanese government because of how they make their tea, how they've maintained the quality of their tea because they use traditional concepts when they're making their matcha.
Yeah.
So they've been recognized in their own country as being special also.
Yeah, so This facility on the left is the new matcha factory. That just came on in 2017, so super modern, state of the art. This is their old processing facility, and this is where they now do the kukacha, the hojicha, the sencha, and the gamaicha. Okay, this is a picture of Masaaki and Kyora's dad. This is Hiroyuki, and he's probably in his 60s now. But as Heather said, his dad was the one that received the award. So we're just sitting in the office. But what's cool here is sort of to acknowledge my visit, they went out and did the little flag thing. So US flag, Japanese flag, and then the Sujimoto flag. And just kind of to commemorate my visit there. Just another signal of, again, them welcoming you and just really, yeah, it was nice. Couple pictures here of, this is the facility, the matcha facility. This is the storage. So when you buy matcha, you should keep it in the fridge. And so once the matcha is finished, it's kept in this refrigerated space, 8 degrees Celsius. You know, so it was quite cool. You know, it was quite cold in there. But again, that's to preserve the flavor and the quality of the matcha. This is the foreman, basically the guy who's in charge of running the factory, and he gave us the tour, and he's just looking at some of the cutters. So again, this is for cutting the leaf. In terms of export, that's a growing part of the industry, and particularly when you think about matcha and some of the other higher quality teas, a lot of those are getting exported now because of, again, how valuable they are. Now, there are two different kinds of matcha. One is the culinary grade. There are different, obviously, standards in terms of the culinary grade. So you have some quite nice ones, but those are the grades that you generally will be able to find in the stores or in the tea shops. The ceremonial grades, those are the ones that were historically reserved for the emperors or the shoguns or, you know, the most important people in their societies. Now you can get those ceremonial grades, but you're going to pay for them. Okay, so those ceremonial grades, if you go to maybe some really nice tea houses in this country or in Europe, you would maybe be finding ceremonial matcha. Our matcha is not ceremonial. Again, it's just a really good quality culinary grade. So that's something, again, that separates matcha. And all matcha, as I said, is graded. But today, the machines cut the leaves following the separation of stems and stalks. The leaves are then steamed and dried several times. So for those of you who are not aware of Japanese green tea, it's different than Chinese and other greens because they steam it. Chinese greens are pan fried or pan roasted, so it really creates a much different flavor. And the steaming and drying process, I mean, what would you say, Heather? It brings out more of a almost
More of like a seaweedy versus a vegetal.
Yeah, seaweed versus vegetal. So you definitely know that it's a distinctive flavor with the Japanese greens. And it is then ground using machine grinder, resulting obviously in the really finely milled matcha. Okay, I mentioned, yes, a lot of capital that's taken or that's needed to invest in these kinds of technologies. This is one of the blenders. So basically, what Noli said is you can do it in one day. You can do the matcha all in one day, but usually they'll do the cutting and separating of the destemming and destalking and deveining of the leaf, and then they'll put it into basically a storage bin, and they'll let it sit there, sometimes for months, because that's going to enhance the flavor. And then when they're ready to process it, then they'll take it out of those blenders. So this is a blender, and this is more for the packaging once it's milled. This is one of the filters, and this is one of the grinders. So you can see that little screw that turns it. So you can imagine the matcha going down through that. and then ultimately it'll go through these filters, these fine filters. All right, last stage before packaging, you got to X-ray it. So they do 3 metal checks throughout the manufacturing process, some of them using magnets, but at the end here, it goes to the X-ray machine just to see if there are any metals or other foreign substances. Now, these ball bearings, these are used in the final process of breaking it down again into that fine powder, but sometimes these things end up in the tea. And then ultimately, this is what you see it in the store. So obviously the Japanese, lots of color in their packaging, but usually you're gonna buy it in a tin. Ice cream, quite popular, can find it all over, but it's really interwoven now into Japanese food culture, and so it's becoming more popular in the US too. Now, primarily to bake with, but it's used as an ingredient in a whole bunch of different products. And again, some people really like to see like their pastries green because it'll give off that kind of distinctive color. But the important part is that the health benefits are the same, whether you're drinking it or whether you're eating it. And this was in the Tea Museum. I took this picture, but it just gives you a sense of some of the different food products. Yeah, chewing gum, ice cream, sweets, pastries, pastas, soups. Okay, so Mark, I did mention this. So this is the Makanahara tea plantation. I'm standing on the balcony at the Tea Museum right here, and this is Kakagawa, which is a small city in Shizuoka. But you're looking down, obviously, into the city. But Fuji is kind of right off on the background here. But this is the largest plantation in Japan at 5,000 hectares. And here you see, these are all the blowers. So those, obviously, when it gets cold, they'll use the blowers to prevent frost and freezing on the leaf. Yeah, so I had mentioned this. Shizuoka is the green tea capital of Japan, known for its sencha, and 80% of all the green tea consumed in Japan is sencha. I went to a much smaller tea farm and tea operation in Kumamoto. So as I said, Kumamoto, southern island of Kyushu, really, really mellow down there compared to some of the larger metropolises. I found it to be a little bit more like Montana, being in Kumamoto. Kumamoto, the city is about 1 million people, so it's quite large, but it's easy to get outside of it, and then you're in the rural areas. So you're gonna see some pictures. Now, this is Ravi and her husband Otto. So they own a small company called Annapurna, and they have a farm of about 2.5 acres, so not very big, about 1 hectare. But he was a musician, played in, I guess, some pretty famous bands in Japan for many years, but met Ravi, and she, this is true story, dropped out of high school in the 90s to be an anti-nuclear activist. And she got quite a bit of attention for that. So she did a lot of activism on the anti-nuclear front during the 90s, but they met, and at that point, eventually got married. And her parents are the ones who bought this place, and then Ravi and Otto moved there, I want to say about 10 years ago, and started to become farmers. One of the places that Mako, my host in Kumamoto, took me to was, this is the old Shogun's Park that was created. So there's a major castle in Kumamoto, heavily damaged in 2016 from the earthquake. So they're still working on it. In fact, right when I was there, they were just reopening parts of the castle. But the Shogun built this park, and there's a little tea house. So that's why Mako took me to, and the reason for this is he wanted the park to be like all of Japan. So this is supposed to symbolize Fuji. Yeah, so this just says, the Kumamoto Prefectural designated important cultural property. The room used for the initiation of the secret waka poetry. You're welcome to go around this building freely. It is said that you can see the most beautiful view in this garden from here. Also, you can drink traditional powdered green tea, matcha, which is Japanese culture in this room or outside seating area. Would you like to experience it? Yes, I did. And here it is. So you're sitting here looking out at the garden, and this is how the matcha bowl came, and then it was served with this little bean curd right here. This is unbelievable. You know, just like a super simple, and there were lots of people that came while we were there. This is a picture of Mako. So she's the woman that works for the state of Montana, paid through our Department of Tourism. But again, she's there to help trade, cultural, educational exchanges, any of that stuff, she's there. Right after I was there, President Bodner was there from the University of Montana, and so she was going to take him around. First, she had to take this low bagger. So this gentleman right here, I met him in August at the Mansfield Center, and he is the director for the state of Kumamoto of the Department of Commerce, Industry, Tourism, and Labor. And so it was really good to meet him again. And so, you know, we all went out to dinner that night, and they plied me with sake. Yeah, just, it's beautiful. That's the thing that you get in Japan, is that just these little just vignettes of beauty. And of course, the koi, got to have fish. Another shot of the garden. Okay. All right, so this is now tea grown in the mountains surrounding Kumamoto. So this is the Annapurna farm. And it's at an elevation of about 600 meters. So, you know, give or take a couple thousand feet. But you're going to see some interesting pictures here because it's definitely seasons. You know, it's, even though it's subtropical, they still experience seasons. And so this is their, obviously these are their bushes, and this was all pretty recently picked because I was there in early October, and I think they had just picked it in August. So this is Ravi and Odo in their organic tea garden. And you can see like there's some weeds coming up here, and yeah, it's kind of cool. One of the things that, again, that has been recognized by the United Nations and specifically UNESCO is that in Shizuko, they have what they call tea grass fields, and they're recognized by the UN as globally important agricultural heritage system. UNFAO defines these as remarkable land use systems and landscapes which are rich in globally significant biological diversity, evolving from the co-adaptation of community with its environment and its needs and aspirations for sustainable development. Essentially what this means is it's kind of like biodynamic farming, where you've got grass and stuff that's growing in between the tea bushes, and of course that's supplying them with nitrogen and other nutrients. And so it's a much more interactive, you know, not permaculture, but they're definitely doing it differently than what you might say in India, you know, where it's just much more of an agricultural intensive operation. All right, so here's the old style Japanese tea cutter. I mean, this thing looks like, you know, a lawnmower, but this is what they're using on their farm, okay? And,
Do you mean like picker? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, so this is for, you know, they're using this to cut the tea. To pick the tea, yep. So again, this is primitive. You know, this is very primitive technology based on what they're using today in terms of what I showed you from the Happy Mujiki, you know, where, again, that was a very big machine. Yeah. And obviously, small operation, they've got 7 people that are working, you know, for this particular harvest. Obviously, it's forested, so you see a lot of the Japanese cedar that's growing around there, and the couple that they just cut here. So it's definitely in the forest. Okay, so this is the shot I want to show you. Snow on tea. And as I said, even though it's subtropical, it still does snow there occasionally. Obviously, if you go way far north, you know, you can go ski all year round up in Hokkaido, but this is fairly rare. But again, the tea can live and can survive with the snow. I just want to show you a picture of Ravi's parents. So this is Takai and Chico, and this is their house on the left. And then Otto and Ravi live in a different house. But he came to Montana in the early 90s and did a faculty kind of exchange at MSU. And he taught some classes on sustainability and spirituality. He's a philosopher, and when he was younger, he was studying to be a monk, and one of the things they made him do was basically become a beggar in the streets of Calcutta. Yep. So the reason I think that they call it Annapurna Tea Company is because of him and his Buddhism, and obviously his affinity for India. So that's still something that I think is important. So they incorporate that into the name of the company. But yeah, very cool people. And I mean, it kind of reminded me almost like of a back to the land situation, because they bought the farm, I think, in 1990. So they've had it about 30 years now. They've also acquired more land going up the mountain, which they drove us up to. And so again, they're not just farmers, but they're protecting a lot of really nice habitat too. Yeah, so more than tea, they're obviously farmers. And so you can see Otto in the rice field here, and I think this is a bunch of their fruit that they have out there drying. So they're just self-sufficient. This is a picture that Ravi sent me. So I thought this is so cool. This is their sencha with the sweet red bean paste and the mugwort rice dumpling. The food in Japan, that's the #1 reason to go. That and the trains. It's so visually appealing. It's like eye candy for your stomach. And so, the food was just awesome. Here's my one wildlife shot. Some kind of big moth. But you see the mountains surrounding the farm. This is looking up again. And then obviously this is a shot in the fall when the leaves start to change. So that's it for the slides. But I definitely want to see if folks have any questions or comments or just observations. Yeah, Scott?
Can you reflect a little bit more on packaging and distribution from them? Because how do some farmers kind of package their own stuff, or like?
Definitely Ravi and Otto are doing all their own packaging. They've developed their own label, much like what we've done here. For Sujimoto, they are a much larger distributor. So they do about 150 metric tons of matcha per year. So they've got bigger accounts that they're supplying. So, but even they also sell it, in the half-pound bags. But you could also buy larger bulk quantities from them as well. So Sujimoto is on a much different scale than Annapurna. Annapurna would be considered small scale, very, very artisan, very much a family operation. So it's two different types, I think, of tea companies. But the amount of tea that is consumed in Japan, there's a ton of competition out there. And I mean, I was just scratching the surface. I mean, we feel very lucky that we have this relationship with Sujimoto and now with Ravi and Otto and her parents. But there are literally hundreds of tea companies in Japan. So we are just, our lens is, fairly small in terms of who we know.
Most of the tea that's produced in Japan is drunk in Japan also. So it's a domestic market, and
Yep.
the international market is much smaller.
Is much smaller, although growing in terms of the matcha.
I
Definitely.
would say that's probably why Sujimoto is invested in that manufacturing plant in the new matcha, because they know that the demand is growing.
Yeah, yeah,
The prices will continue to go up too because of matcha.
yeah, for sure.
So Jake, do they grow, is there any tea grown in the western U.S.? I know there's a couple, with at least one plantation I thought I saw in Georgia or South Carolina.
There's very little tea growing in the U.S. Yes, the plantation in South Carolina, which I believe is on one of the barrier islands.
It is, it's on
Yeah, it's on a barrier island, but as we know, the best tea grows at elevation. So South Carolina doesn't have a lot of elevation. They do have the right climate as far as the heat and the humidity, but they don't have elevation. So the tea's decent, but as you come out west, there has been, I think, somebody who's experimented with growing it in the Skagit Valley, but I don't think it's really become what we would call commercially viable. So again, I think the tea plant would grow in some areas around here, but again, enough to make it viable for commercial production, probably not. Now, we do grow tea in Hawaii, so obviously that has the right climate and it has mountains.
Did you attend tea ceremony? And are tea ceremonies like a private thing that someone invites you to in a house, or is that something that you go to like a restaurant?
It's much more private, and I think there are certain tea houses that will hold tea ceremonies, but I did not go to a ceremony while I was in Japan. It's usually, yeah, more of an individual thing, and to become a tea master is a fairly, long and regimented process. So Tomoko, who's the woman that's doing the visiting scholar thing here at U of M, she will be able to talk a lot more about what it takes to become a tea master. But my understanding is that it's not something that like tea shops are offering on a regular basis. It's much more something where you're invited to be part of it. And I think that some of them can last all day or all afternoon, and then some of them can be, like a half hour to an hour long. But I know that when I went and talked to Tomoko a few weeks ago, she had her little mobile matcha set that she pulled right out of her desk, and she made me a matcha right there. So that's really what it's about, is being able to, and it's very simple, but you follow the right steps along the way. And so that's very, very important in terms of the rituals that go into it. But back to what I said about it becoming much more austere, much more about your personal, I guess, relationship, with the tea.
So you might do it yourself, like alone.
You could do it yourself, absolutely.
It does seem a form of meditation.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
matcha
But also,
back to that, but I also feel like it's a focused individual practice, like
yeah.
Going all out, making a bed, or doing a workout.
Yeah, or very small groups. Very small groups. You don't see it done like in a convention or something like that.
Can you speak a little more to you talked a good bit about the matcha, but the first and the last tea you just had?
Sure. So in Japan, the most popular green tea is the sencha. And that is what most Japanese are familiar with. When I went around to the tea shops, it was almost always a sencha that they were letting you sample. And some of the Rugby World Cup events, they had tables set up from different tea suppliers, and it was always sencha. It was always sencha. Now, some of the other more, I guess, specialized greens would be the kukacha, which is the stem tea. That was the first one we had, which has less caffeine, but I really like the flavor of it. It's so smooth. And then the hojicha is the roasted green, which we have.
It's the roasted version of kukicha.
The roasted version of kukicha, so it's the roasted stems. Yep. And then the gamaicha is the rice, the toasted rice, and corn, right?
No, it's rice. Rice with probably a bancha or a sencha.
Bancha or a sencha. Yeah. And then, beyond that, the very highest end green is the gyokura, and that's the emperor's tea. And so, like when I mentioned the Uji area around Kyoto, that's where that comes from.
So did you have any of that while you were there?
No. And I didn't really get to Kyoto. I wanted to, but some of the guys did go there for a day or two of sightseeing. But you could spend a week in Kyoto, big time. So I definitely think you could hang out there quite a while. There's a lot to do there. But some of the best tea comes from there, for sure. And definitely it has a great reputation for the best matchas and the best gyokuro. Yeah. And believe it or not, so while I was there at Sujimoto, they've been working on a Japanese black, which we now have called the wakucha. And so they brought out some trays of the wakucha for me to look at. So there is more demand now for black tea in Japan. And so they are starting to process black tea. So that's kind of a new phenomenon. But much like I didn't realize that Japan makes some of the best whiskey in the world, they now want to get into making black tea. So that's, like I said, that's kind of a new development. Other questions? Comments? Well, you guys have been very attentive tonight, and I hope you got something out of it. I really want to encourage you, if you are looking for a country to go visit, go to Japan. Buy the rail pass, because it's so cheap.
It's not cheap, it's the way to do it though.
It's cheap compared to, like, if you're a Japanese, you're paying basically as much for the rail pass for one ticket somewhere. You know, that they really want to encourage you to get around the country. So again, I bought a 2-week rail pass, and like I said, it was the best thing I did. And I would say that there is so much natural beauty there too. It's not, I mean, obviously super organized, super technological, but they've done a good job of protecting a lot of the natural areas. And right at the end of my trip, I did get to go down to Shizuoka again, and we spent some time in Hakone, which is the area around Fuji. Went to an onsen, so the onsens are the hot spas where you can go soak. And so it was really nice, and just kind of being able to see, you know, some of the scenic attractions. But you know, it can be expensive if you eat out a lot and you go to some of the nicer places. But you know, you can also like eat the ramen bowls, you know, for 600 to 800 yen, and hang out in the 7-Elevens and the Lawsons and the Family Marts, which, believe it or not, the convenience store food in Japan is very, very good. I'm serious, like, you know, because it's made right there, you know, like they'll make the sushi right there. And so you can be relatively low cost, you know, no frills, and do fine. You don't have to go to all the fancy places. Yeah. But the food was good. Food was good.
Hotels, or were the cost of the hotels like, or could you talk to that?
Pretty reasonable, and again, the cool thing, I didn't show you that. By the way, just so you guys know, the end of March, as part of the community speaker series that the Roxy and Arts Missoula puts on, I'm going to be doing another presentation on Japan. That will be much more focused on the larger culture, and it will have a lot more about the food, the people, the geography, the rugby. So please come to that if you're interested, and we'll also be serving matcha there at that. I think Tomoka's going to come and do some tea there. But that would be more informative in terms of learning more about the country, you know, as a whole, and not so much about the tea. This was much more tea-centric. Yeah. All right, y'all. Thanks for coming.